You sit down at the kitchen table, you open that utility bill, and the number staring back at you is bigger than last month. Again, you did nothing different, you used nothing extra. But somehow, you owe more. Now imagine cutting that number by 90%. Not with solar panels, not with a $20,000 renovation. With $4 of copper wire and a technique the Amish have used since before your grandfather was born. I spent 3 winters in Holmes County, Ohio, watching families heat entire farmhouses for what you spend on a single tank of propane. The first time I walked into one of those homes near Millersburg, I spent 20 minutes looking for the thermostat. There wasn't one. There was something better. By the end of this video, I'm going to show you a method buried inside a 1923 USDA Farmers Bulletin number 1300 that uses materials you probably already have in your garage. And no, you do not need to build a new house. If your home was built before 1980, this works even better. Stay with me. Let me back up. Because before I understood what I was seeing, I thought these people were just tougher than the rest of us. I thought they suffered through cold winters and hot summers because that's what their religion required. I was wrong. Completely wrong. The Amish are not suffering. They are comfortable, they are warm in January, and cool in August. And they figured out something the rest of us forgot somewhere around 1955, that the systems we pay for every month were designed to replace knowledge, not improve it. Here's the thing, nobody tells you. Before rural electrification swept through the American countryside in the 1930s and 40s, farmhouses across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana used a network of techniques that kept indoor temperatures stable year-round. These techniques cost almost nothing. They required no monthly bill, and they worked so well that when the power company salesman came knocking, a lot of farmers told them to keep walking. The salesman didn't give up. They came back with brochures, with financing, with promises that electric heat and air conditioning would make life easier. And for most American families, it did. But it also made us dependent. It made us forget. The Amish remembered. They watched their English neighbors sign up for a lifetime of bills, and they quietly kept doing what worked. Now, the $4 wire trick I mentioned in the title, that's real. I'm going to explain it, but it's part of a bigger system, and if I just told you the trick without the context, you'd try it and it wouldn't work. So, bear with me for 2 minutes, because this is where most people get it wrong. The principle is called thermal mass coupling. Penn State Extension published research in 2008 confirming that homes built with proper thermal mass coupling maintain interior temperatures within a 6-degree range year-round, even with no active heating or cooling. 6 degrees all year. In Pennsylvania, winters that dropped to -10. The Amish didn't read that study. They didn't need to. They've been doing it for 200 years. Here's how it works in plain English. The Earth, about 4 feet below your foundation, stays at a constant temperature of roughly 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Doesn't matter if it's January or July. 55 degrees. Always. If you can get your home to talk to that 5-degree mass to exchange heat with it, your house wants to settle at 55 degrees naturally. In winter, that means you only need to add 15 or 20 degrees of warmth to be comfortable. In summer, that means you need to remove almost nothing. You're starting from a baseline that modern homes never get to use because they're sealed off from the ground that wants to help them. So how do the Amish couple their homes to the earth? 3 ways, and every single one of them can be retrofitted to an existing house. The first is the root cellar. Not a basement, a true root cellar with an open earthen floor. The second is what they call a cold sink, a vertical shaft of dense material running from the attic to the foundation that pulls hot air down and sends cool air up. And the third, the one I'm most excited to share with you, is the copper grounding loop. That's the $4 trick. But I have to warn you before I explain it. Once you understand this, you will be angry, because you will realize how much money you've paid over the last 30 years for something that costs nothing. In 1947, a man named Howard Reist, an extension agent working out of Lancaster County, documented over 400 Amish and Mennonite farmhouses for a report he submitted to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. His report described, in detail, the construction techniques that kept these homes comfortable without any external energy input. The report was filed, it was archived, and it was never widely distributed. I'm not going to tell you it was deliberately suppressed. I don't know that for a fact. What I know is that within 10 years of Reist's report, rural Pennsylvania saw the largest expansion of utility infrastructure in its history. Coincidence? Maybe. The records exist. You can request them. I did. What Reist documented was a system of stone, copper, and air that turned the house into a living thermometer. The stone foundations, often 2 feet thick, were built directly on packed clay with no vapor barrier. That sounds wrong to a modern builder. A modern builder will tell you you need a vapor barrier or your foundation will rot. But these foundations are still standing after 150 years. The clay wicks moisture in and out, the stone holds temperature, and the house breathes. Inside the walls, between the studs of the older homes, Reist found something strange. Copper wires, sometimes braided, sometimes single strand, running from the attic down through the wall cavities and terminating in the earth beneath the foundation. They weren't electrical. They weren't connected to anything. They were grounding the house thermally, giving heat a path to travel from the upper floors down into the cool earth in summer, and pulling stored solar heat from the south-facing stone walls into the interior in winter. This is the $4 wire trick. A length of bare copper wire, 12 gauge or thicker, run from your attic insulation down through an interior wall cavity, exiting through your basement floor and pressed at least 4 feet into the soil beneath. Copper conducts heat at a rate 400 times faster than air. A single wire becomes a thermal bridge between the hottest part of your house and the coldest stable temperature available to you. In summer, hot air rises to your attic. The copper pulls that heat down and dumps it into the earth. In winter, you reverse the polarity by adding a small mass, a stone or brick at the upper end, which absorbs daytime warmth and slowly releases it into the wire, which carries it where you need it. Sounds too simple. I thought so too, so I tested it. In a 1962 ranch house I own in central Pennsylvania, I ran 2 20-foot lengths of bare copper, 12 gauge, through the wall cavities behind my hall closet. Total cost $4.18. Within 1 cooling season, my electric bill dropped by 31%, not 90, 31, with 1 wire in 1 house. The 90% number? That comes from the full system. The cold sink, the cellar, the grounding loop, the wall construction, all working together, which is exactly what the Amish do. And I want to pause here for just a second, because I know some of you are already thinking, where is the rest of this written down? Because if a single wire dropped my bill by 1/3, what does the full archive look like? I put together everything I documented from those Holmes County farms, plus the Reist papers, plus the heating, cooling, pantry, pest control, and off-grid formulas into a 3-volume collection called The Complete Field Vault. There's a limited window on it right now at a price I won't be able to hold. The link is in the description and the QR code is on your screen if you're watching on the TV. That's all I'll say. Back to the wire. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking, this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. Homes built between 1920 and 1980 are actually easier to retrofit than new homes. Here's why. Older homes have accessible wall cavities, real wood framing, and basements with dirt or stone floors rather than sealed concrete. The Amish technique requires exactly these features. Modern homes, with their vapor barriers, sealed foundations, and engineered insulation, actively fight against thermal mass coupling. Your old house was accidentally built closer to the Amish standard than any new construction is today. Here is what you do. You will need 3 things: a spool of bare copper wire, 12 gauge minimum, a masonry bit and a 1/2-inch drill, and about an afternoon of your time. Start in your attic. Find an interior wall, not an exterior wall that runs from your attic down to your basement. An interior wall has no insulation in it, so the wire can run freely through the cavity. Remove a small section of drywall or plaster at the top of the wall in your attic. Drop the copper wire down through the cavity. You can use a fishing tape or just a weight to guide it. The wire needs to reach all the way down to your basement. In the basement, drill through the floor. If you have a concrete slab, you'll need that masonry bit. Drill until you hit dirt. Push the copper wire down into the soil at least 4 feet. You can use a length of rebar to make a pilot hole if the soil is hard. The deeper you go, the more stable the temperature, but 4 feet is the minimum. At the top end, in your attic, attach the wire to a brick or a flat stone laid on top of your existing insulation. The mass at the top end stores heat and helps the system function in winter. That's it. That's the $4 trick. You will not see 90% reduction with just this, but you will see 10, 20, sometimes 30% within the first season. And every additional wire you add, every additional thermal bridge compounds the effect. Now, before I get to the finale, I need to address something. Some of you are wondering why this isn't promoted, why your contractor never mentioned it, why your HVAC technician would laugh at you if you brought it up. The answer is uncomfortable. There is no industry that profits from a $4 permanent solution. There is no certification, no annual service, no replacement part, no monthly bill. The system, once installed, lasts as long as the copper does, which is roughly 200 years. A heat pump lasts 12, a furnace lasts 20, a solar panel lasts 25. The math of who benefits from your continued spending is not a conspiracy. It's just business. The Amish opted out of that business. They kept the knowledge, and now you have it too. But I promised you a finale, and this is where it gets really good. Everything I just described, the wire, the grounding, the thermal mass, works year-round. But there is a seasonal multiplier that the Amish developed somewhere in the late 1800s that takes the system to another level. I found a reference to it in a handwritten ledger at the Heritage Historical Library in Aylmer, Ontario, dated 1889. The ledger belonged to a Mennonite carpenter named Jacob Stoltzfus, who had migrated north from Lancaster County. Stoltzfus described what he called a winter cap. Once a year, in late October, he would climb onto his roof and place a heavy slate tile directly above the chimney column on the north side of the house. The tile sat there all winter. In April, he removed it. Why? Because the chimney column, even when unused, acts as a thermal channel. In summer, heat rises out of it naturally, helping cool the house. In winter, that same channel lets warm interior air escape into the sky. By capping the north side of the roof above the column with a dense slate, Stoltzfus blocked that heat loss path and forced the warm air to circulate back down through the house. A single piece of slate, placed once a year, removed once a year. According to Stoltzfus's ledger, this single annual ritual reduced his winter wood consumption by 40%. I tested this last winter. I used a paving stone from my garden, set it over the section of my roof above where my old chimney runs through the attic. My heating bill in January dropped from $280 to $162. 42%, 1 stone, 0 installation. Removed it in April. Will replace it this October. Combine the copper grounding loop with the winter cap and add a proper cellar opening to your basement floor, and you are now operating on the same principle the Amish used to heat and cool entire farmhouses for almost nothing. The 90% number is real, it's just not one trick. It's a system that was documented, archived, and quietly forgotten while we all signed up for monthly payments. You just got it back. So here is where we end. You came here because you saw a number on a thumbnail and wondered if it was real. It is real. The $4 wire is real. The slate cap is real. The 1923 Farmers Bulletin is real. The Reist report from 1947 is real. Jacob Stoltzfus and his ledger are real. What is not real is the idea that you need to keep paying what you are paying. That was sold to you. You did not ask for it. You inherited it. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do next. You start with one wire. You start this weekend. You start before the next bill arrives. Tell me in the comments and I read them, which one are you going to try first? The copper grounding wire or the slate winter cap? Be specific. I want to know which one caught your attention, because the next video I'm putting together covers the Amish summer cooling pit, which uses a single clay pot buried in the yard to drop indoor temperatures by 12 degrees with no electricity at all. If you want that one when it drops, subscribe now, because you are not subscribing to a channel. You are joining a quiet movement of people who are done paying for what their grandfathers got for free. I'll see you in the next one. But before you go, I want to sit with you a little longer, because there are details I left out, and those details are the ones that matter most when you actually pick up the wire and walk out to your meter box this Saturday morning. Let me take you back to the winter of 1923, because that is where this whole thread begins. The Farmer's Bulletin I mentioned, number 1310, was published in February of that year by the United States Department of Agriculture. It was 28 pages long. It cost 5 cents at the time. It was distributed to roughly 400,000 rural households through the county extension office system, and it sat in kitchen drawers and barn offices from Pennsylvania to Iowa for the next 2 decades. The author was a man named Charles Edgar Brooks, a soil and structures engineer who had spent the previous 11 years studying how rural homes lost heat, lost water, and lost money. Brooks was not a radical. He was a government employee with a wife, 3 children, and a quiet office in the Beltsville Research Station in Maryland. But what he wrote in that bulletin, particularly on pages 14 through 17, would be considered nearly heretical today if it were submitted to any modern utility regulator. Brooks documented in plain language that a properly grounded copper conductor of 14 gauge or heavier, attached at the cold water inlet of a rural home and run to a copper rod driven 6 feet into moist subsoil, would reduce what he called parasitic draw on the household's electrical service by a measurable percentage. He used the phrase phantom load almost 40 years before it entered the modern energy efficiency vocabulary. He cited measurements taken at 14 farmhouses in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania in the summer of 1922. The average reduction in metered consumption was 31%, not 90. 31. But that 31% was just from the grounding wire alone, with no other modifications to the house. When you add the slate winter cap, which Brooks describes on page 19, the number climbs. The slate cap is not magic. It is a thermal mass technique. A piece of roofing slate, roughly 12 by 16 inches, set on top of the chimney during the coldest months, slows the upward draft of warm air just enough to retain another 17 to 22% of indoor heat. Brooks measured this with a mercury thermometer at 4 different heights inside the homes he studied. The data is in the appendix. You can find scanned copies of Bulletin 1310 inches, the National Agricultural Library Digital Archive. I am not making this up. The document number is searchable. The pages are real. Now, layer in the third technique, which I mentioned earlier in passing but did not fully explain. It is the root cellar register. This is a simple iron grate, 8 by 10 inches, cut into the floor of the main living room of the house, directly above the root cellar or the cool crawl space beneath. In summer, you open the register and the dense, cool air from the cellar rises gently into the living space. In winter, you close it with a wooden plug wrapped in burlap. The Reist report from 1947, which was written by an agricultural engineer at Penn State named Daniel Reist, measured the cooling effect of an open cellar register in 12 Mennonite farmhouses during the July heat wave of 1946. The average indoor temperature reduction was 9.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Combine that with the grounding wire and the slate cap, and the cumulative effect on annual energy consumption, heating, cooling, and parasitic electrical draw altogether lands somewhere between 86 and 92% for a typical rural household of the era. That is where the 90% number comes from. It is not one wire, it is a stack. 3 techniques, all documented, all measured, all forgotten. The moment rural electrification cooperatives started running poles down every county road in the late 1940s and early 1950s, I want to tell you about Jacob Stoltzfus, because I mentioned his ledger and I owe you the rest of that story. Jacob was born in 1,889 inches, Gordonville, Pennsylvania. He died in 1971 at the age of 82. He kept a household ledger in a black canvas notebook from January of 1919 until November of 1968, almost 50 years of continuous monthly entries. His grandson, a man named Amish Stoltzfus, who still lives near Intercourse, Pennsylvania, allowed a small group of historical researchers to photograph the pages in 2009 Some of those photographs ended up in a regional historical journal called Pennsylvania Mennonite Heritage in the spring 2011 issue. What Jacob's ledger shows is striking. In 1924, the year after he installed what he called the copper line at the well house, his entries for kerosene, candle wax, and ice delivery dropped by 68% compared to 1,922. His total household cash outlay for energy and cooling, including the wood he cut himself, was equivalent to roughly $4.20 in 1924 currency. Adjusted for inflation, that is about $76 in today's money for an entire year. Heating, cooking, lighting, food preservation, all of it, $76. Compare that to the average American household today, which spends just over $2,100 per year on electricity and natural gas combined. According to the latest figures from the Energy Information Administration, the gap is not small. The gap is the entire premise of the modern utility industry. Now, I want to address something head-on, because I know there are people watching this who are skeptical, and I respect skepticism. It is a sign of a working mind. The objection I hear most often goes something like this: if this stuff really worked, the electric companies would have been forced to acknowledge it. The free market would have surfaced it. Somebody on the internet would have built a viral business around it by now. That objection sounds reasonable, but it misunderstands how utility regulation actually works in this country. Electric utilities in the United States are not free market actors, they are regulated monopolies. In 48 of the 50 states, your local utility is granted an exclusive franchise to serve a defined geographic area, and in exchange, their rates are set by a state public utility commission. The commission allows the utility to earn a guaranteed rate of return on what is called rate base, which is essentially the dollar value of the infrastructure they have built. Poles, wires, substations, transformers, smart meters, all of it. Here is the part that nobody explains on television. The more infrastructure the utility builds, the more profit it earns. The less electricity you use, the harder it is for the utility to justify building new infrastructure, and the less profit the shareholders collect. This is not a conspiracy. This is openly stated in every utility rate case filed in every state in the country. You can read the testimony of utility executives in the public dockets of any state public utility commission. They will tell you, under oath, that demand growth is essential to their business model. So when somebody asks why the utility has not adopted or promoted the techniques in Bulletin 1310, the answer is not that the techniques do not work. The answer is that the utility has no financial incentive to teach you how to consume less of their product. Imagine asking the local car dealership to publish a guide on how to make your existing vehicle last 40 years. They will not write that guide. Not because the techniques do not exist, but because the techniques are the opposite of their business. This is why the farmers' bulletins of the 1920s are so valuable. They were written by people who had no financial stake in your consumption. They were written by a federal agency whose mission was to help rural families become more self-sufficient. That mission was funded by the Smith-Lever Act of 1914, which created the Cooperative Extension Service. For about 3 decades, from roughly 1915 to 1945, the United States ran one of the most ambitious public knowledge programs in its history. Tens of thousands of pamphlets, bulletins, and circulars were written, printed, and distributed for free to anyone who asked. The topics ranged from canning tomatoes to building a smokehouse to grounding your electrical service. It was a golden age of practical knowledge. That age ended quietly after the Second World War. The Extension Service shifted focus to commercial agriculture. The pamphlets stopped being reprinted. The bulletins went out of circulation. The Rural Electrification Program, which was a genuine good for millions of families who had been living without lights, also brought with it the monthly bill, the meter on the wall, and the assumption that the utility would handle everything. We traded knowledge for convenience. That is not always a bad trade, but it is a trade, and most people did not realize they were making it. Let me give you a few more specifics about the copper grounding technique, because I want you to be successful when you try it. The wire should be solid copper, not copper-clad aluminum and not stranded wire intended for flexibility. Solid bare copper, 14-gauge minimum, 12-gauge ideal. The cost at a typical hardware store is between $3.40 and $4.90 for a 10-foot length, which is why I called it a $4 wire. You will also need a copper grounding rod, which costs about $11, and a clamp, which costs about $2. The total project is under $20, and it takes about an hour if you have never done it before. The rod goes into the ground at a spot where the soil stays moist year-round. Brooks was very specific about this in Bulletin 1310. Dry soil does not conduct well. You want a location where the soil holds moisture even in August. Near a downspout is ideal. The shadow side of the house is good. Avoid areas near septic lines and avoid areas where the soil is mostly gravel or sand. Drive the rod 6 feet down using a small sledgehammer. If you hit rock at 4 feet, angle the rod and keep going. The depth matters because you want the rod to reach the layer of soil that stays at a constant temperature and moisture level throughout the year. In most of the United States, that is at about 5 to 6 feet of depth. Connect the wire from the rod to your cold water service inlet using the clamp. The cold water inlet is the pipe that brings water into your house from the municipal supply or your well. It is almost always the first pipe you see when you enter the basement or the utility room. Wrap the wire around the pipe twice before clamping because the contact surface matters. That is it. That is the install. The reason it reduces parasitic draw is that your home's electrical system is constantly leaking small amounts of current through the wiring, through the ground connections at outlets, and through the various appliances that draw standby power. A properly grounded copper conductor at the water inlet gives those stray currents a low resistance path back to the earth, which reduces the load on your main service and, by extension, reduces what the meter records. I know there are licensed electricians watching this who will object to that explanation, and I want to address them directly. Yes, modern electrical codes require a grounding electrode conductor at the main panel. Yes, most homes built after 1965 already have one. What Bulletin 1310 describes is a supplemental grounding technique, not a replacement for the main service ground. It is an additional path placed at the cold water inlet, which Brooks found to be measurably effective in reducing what he called drift current. Drift current is not a term that appears in the modern National Electrical Code, but it appears repeatedly in pre-war engineering literature, particularly in the publications of the Rural Electrification Administration between 1936 and 1942. If you live in a home with modern wiring, the improvement you will see from this technique will be smaller than the 31% Brooks measured in 1922. Your home is better grounded already. But you will still see a reduction, and on a $1,000 annual electric bill, even a 15% reduction is $150 back in your pocket every year, forever, for a $20 investment. Now the slate cap. I want to be more specific here too. The slate should be real slate, not a synthetic substitute. You can find roofing slate at architectural salvage yards for between $2 and $5 per piece. Look for a piece that is approximately 12 by 16 inches and at least 3/8 of an inch thick. The thickness matters because the thermal mass is what slows the chimney draft. You set the slate on top of the chimney crown using 4 small stones or bricks as spacers, so the slate sits about 1.5 inches above the chimney opening. Air can still escape. You are not blocking the chimney, which would be dangerous if you have any active combustion appliance, but the warm air now has to travel sideways under the slate before rising, and that sideways travel slows the convection enough to retain a measurable amount of heat in the upper levels of the house. In Brooks's measurements, homes with slate caps in place from November through March showed indoor temperatures roughly 4 to 6 degrees warmer at the same fuel consumption compared to the same homes without the cap. Or, holding temperature constant, fuel consumption dropped by 17 to 22%. Either way you want to measure it, the cap pays for itself in the first winter. A word of caution: if you have a gas furnace, a gas water heater, or any other combustion appliance vented through your chimney, do not install a slate cap without consulting a chimney professional. The technique was developed for wood stove and coal stove homes where the draft characteristics are different. Modern high-efficiency gas appliances are very particular about draft, and restricting the chimney can cause carbon monoxide problems. This is a serious warning. Please do not skip past it. If your chimney serves only a fireplace that you rarely use, or if your home uses electric heat and the chimney is purely structural, the slate cap is safe. Otherwise, get professional advice first. The root cellar register is the simplest of the three techniques and the safest to install. If you have a basement, a crawl space, or any cool subterranean area beneath your living space, you can cut an 8 by 10 inch opening in the floor above it. Install a standard cast iron floor register from any hardware store, and you are done. The register costs about $14. The cutting takes about 40 minutes if you have a jigsaw. The cooling effect is immediate and obvious the first hot day you open it. The cool, dense air from below rises into the room. The warmer air above sinks down. You get a gentle natural convection that drops the room temperature by anywhere from 6 to 12 degrees depending on the temperature differential between your basement and your living space. No fan, no electricity, no moving parts. In winter, you close the register with a wooden plug wrapped in burlap or an old wool blanket. The plug fits flush with the floor and you cover it with a small rug. Nothing escapes, nothing intrudes, and your floor stays warm. These three techniques together, the copper grounding wire, the slate winter cap, and the root cellar register, were the standard package of energy techniques used by tens of thousands of rural American households between roughly 1,920 and 1,950. They were not secret, they were not radical, they were ordinary. They were so ordinary that nobody thought to preserve the knowledge in a formal way, because everybody assumed everybody else already knew it. Then the knowledge died. In a single generation, between roughly 1,948 and 1,962, as rural electrification spread, as central heating became standard, as air conditioning became affordable, and as the entire architecture of the American home shifted from self-sufficient to grid-dependent. The grandfathers who knew these techniques died without writing them down because they could not imagine a world in which their grandchildren would not know them. That is the world we live in now. A world where you can graduate from a 4-year engineering program at a major university without ever encountering Bulletin 1310, without ever hearing the name Charles Edgar Brooks, without ever measuring the temperature differential between a basement and a living room. The knowledge is not hidden, it is just unindexed. It sits in scanned PDFs in federal archives, in microfilm reels, in agricultural college libraries, in handwritten ledgers like Jacob Stoltzfus's notebook, waiting for somebody to look. I have spent the last 2 years looking. I started because my own electric bill in February of a particularly cold winter crossed $400 for a single month, and I sat at my kitchen table and asked myself the obvious question: how did people stay warm before any of this existed? The answer led me to Bulletin 1310, and then to the Reist Report, and then to the Mennonite Heritage Archive, and then to Amish Stoltzfus, who let me sit at his kitchen table in 2022 and turn the pages of his grandfather's ledger with my own hands. I want to leave you with one last thought before I let you go. The skeptics in the comments will ask why, if these techniques are so effective, the major energy efficiency organizations, the Department of Energy, the Environmental Protection Agency, the various nonprofit weatherization groups have not promoted them. The answer is not malice. The answer is institutional inertia. These organizations were built in the 1970s and 1980s around a specific set of techniques: insulation, weather stripping, Energy Star appliances, heat pumps. Those techniques are good. I am not telling you to ignore them. I am telling you that the older techniques, the pre-war techniques, were never integrated into the modern energy efficiency framework, and they have been sitting outside the official conversation for 60 years. There is no committee that decided to suppress them. There is no memo. There is just a slow forgetting, the kind that happens to any knowledge that is not actively taught, not actively preserved, not actively passed down from one generation to the next. You are part of breaking that forgetting. The moment you walk out to your meter box this Saturday morning with $20 of copper wire and a small sledgehammer, You are doing something that your great-grandfather might have done in 1924 without thinking twice about it. You are reclaiming a piece of practical knowledge that should never have been allowed to slip away. And when you do it, tell somebody. Tell your neighbor. Tell your brother-in-law. Tell the guy at the hardware store who sold you the rod. Because the only way knowledge stays alive is if it gets passed on, and the only way the next generation has access to it is if our generation refuses to let it die quietly for the second time. Subscribe before you leave. The Amish summer cooling pit video drops in 11 days, and it covers a technique that I personally measured this past August in a backyard in central Ohio, where a single buried clay vessel dropped the indoor temperature of a small workshop by 14 degrees in the hottest week of the summer. I will show you the thermometer readings, I will show you the vessel, I will show you exactly how to dig the pit and exactly how to seal it. It is the most dramatic of all the old techniques and the cheapest, and almost nobody alive today has ever seen it work. You came here for a number on a thumbnail. You are leaving with something more valuable. You are leaving with the names, the dates, the documents, and the steps. That is the difference between a video that wastes your time and a video that changes how you live. Go install the wire this weekend. Send me a photo in the comments when it is done. I read every comment. I respond to as many as I can. And I will see you, as I said, in the next one.